Today on the Pro Church Tools Show, we'll be discussing the 3 big reasons why churches will struggle to keep their doors open in the upcoming decade.
These are the 3 major hurdles that we believe every church needs to address if you want your ministry to be healthy and growing.
By the end of this episode, you'll know what each of these issues is, and we'll present our solutions to them as well. I went this way. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. I'm Brady Shearer, joined as always to my right, your left, it's Alex Mills.
Aloha.
You can subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify's a good one, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe, and you can, of course, watch the video version on YouTube, youtube.com/ProChurchTools.
But if you're watching this video right now, you can't go any further without liking it.
You could.
Well, you could. You should.
I'd recommend not.
And also subscribing to the channel so that you know when we post new videos.
Hit the church bell. You might even get a notification that way.
Notification squad.
Today's episode is inspired by a Facebook thread that I saw in one of the church Facebook groups.
There's too many of them.
My apologies, because I tried my very best to track it down, to include it, to highlight the individual that brought this to our attention. No luck.
It's gone.
Facebook group search feature, terrible.
Honestly, the worst.
I have no idea who they're using to index these items. Anyway, this individual identified themselves as a person from Gen Z.
Yep.
And the simple question that prompted this Facebook thread was, what is it about churches that is making it difficult to navigate this huge, massive communication shift that we're living through? And what followed was, dozens and dozens of comments from real churches and church leaders that were honestly reflecting, looking inwardly, and answering that question. And there was no condescension within the actual Facebook thread.
For Facebook.
Yeah, no anger. It was people just honestly giving their feedback on what they thought were the issues. And it inspired this episode because we thought, well, let's answer that question for ourselves. We've identified 3 of the major things that we think are going to continue to trip up churches if we're not able to acknowledge, identify, and then solve them. We're going to talk about our solutions. And we think that if these aren't solved in the next decade going forward, churches are going to continue to struggle, and many of our churches will actually continue to close.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years. And it's wild because 500 years ago, when the printing press showed up on the scene and changed the way we communicated forever, the church happened to be on the forefront of that breakthrough in technology. The Bible, the first book ever printed on the printing press, and still 500 years later today remains the best printed book of all time. There's never been more copies of any other book printed. So the church was on the forefront of that breakthrough in technology. Here we are 500 years later, the advent of the internet, and the church feels like maybe we're lagging behind a little bit. And I mean, we have some really great statistics, Brad, that you're about to start talking about here, maybe suggesting like where the church is at and how we got there.
And we don't just want to talk about problems, we want to present solutions as well. The 3 major reasons we think churches will struggle because of everything that we're going through. Number 1, that first thing is a shrinking audience and an increase in secularization in North America. We've got a ton of data from Gallup, and so we're going to get into that right now. And I quote, U.S. church membership was 70% or higher from 1937 through 1976, falling modestly to an average of 68% in the 70s through the 90s. The past 20 years, though, have seen an acceleration in the drop-off with a 20 percentage point decline since 1999, so since the turn of the millennium, and more than half of that change occurred since the start of the current decade. Now, Alex, what happened at the beginning of this decade? Oh, I don't know. Literally every single tool that is now integral to our lives started hitting the landscape. And what's crazy to think is that we had almost a 60-year run of church membership, right around 65 to 70%, not moving up or down very much. And then around the turn of the millennium, we started to see this decline that gets really steep right around 2010.
Yeah.
And it goes on. The percentage of Americans identifying as Protestant has declined sharply from 71% in 1955 to 47% in the mid-2000s.
Wow.
Since the turn of the century, the percentage of American adults with no religious affiliation has more than doubled from 8% to 19%. See, the problem is the atheists.
That's it. They've taken the Bibles out of schools, and look at where we find ourselves.
You don't want to blame the atheists? I know who we can blame. The youths. Most millennials. Too young to be polled in 1998 to 2000. But now that we've reached adulthood, Church membership rates, millennials, are exceedingly low and appear to be a major factor in the drop in overall U.S. church membership. Just 42% of millennials are members of churches on average. So to summarize all of this data, basically, church attendance declining steeply, and the reason is because of young people and people that would not identify as religious whatsoever. Two of the driving forces, millennials and those that are secular.
Yeah.
And you might be thinking, and I want to stop this right now, that, well, this is just another example of our country turning its back on God. And you know what? This is what happens when you don't identify as a Christian nation anymore. I would say that that's actually not what's happening. What I would say instead is that the cultural Christianity that existed for the last century or so. And when I say that, I basically just mean the idea that, oh, we're American, we go to church on Sundays. Since the rise of the internet, which has exposed all of us to other ideologies and other cultures and has shrunk the world, so we're not just living in our own Christian cultural North American a bubble anymore, that has opened so many people's eyes, especially young people who grew up that way their whole life. Oh, wait a minute. Just because this is what we've always done doesn't mean it's always what we have to keep doing. And I would say that's actually a good thing, because you can come at this from two perspectives. Firstly, wow, people are attending church less. This is really, really bad, and it's not good for our churches. But if all of those people were attending just because that's what you do, there's at least something to be gained by the fact that those that were attending church just because it was the cultural thing to do are no longer doing it. There's something to be gained there at least.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is church has become so much less of like this cultural norm or like cultural activity that, like you said, you just do because that's what you do. Your parents go to church, so you go to church. But the internet has changed so much of the way that we communicate. And that's a lot about what church is, right? Communicating the truth and the message and the hope of Jesus. And like if you think about the way we used to consume movies, like with Blockbuster, right? You used to have, if you wanted to rent a movie, you used to have to go to the physical store, exchange some money, rent the movie, bring it home, watch it, bring it back. So a necessity was required for Blockbuster to exist. The internet shows up and I can get any movie that I want on any device of mine at any time. And so look around, there's no more Blockbusters. And I think we're seeing a similar thing happen in the church. Church used to be this cultural thing that we participated in together. And if I wanted a message about Jesus, if I wanted to sing with people, I had to go to church to get that stuff. The internet shows up and all of a sudden, I don't have to do that anymore. I can get a message in a podcast. I can get a worship album because there's a new one being released every week and I can stream any music on my phone at any time. I can get that wherever I am. And so church, as we knew it, is becoming a lot less cultural than it used to be, thanks to the internet and what we're seeing in the West with the rise of secularism.
And I like the Blockbuster analogy because it speaks to a time where this certain cultural norm existed, and you didn't have to really be exceptional at movie renting to hop on, piggyback on that trend, because I don't know about you, but like growing up, it seemed like every single convenience store and corner store also rented movies.
You just put up a little rack right by the checkout. It's like, do you need to rent Charlie's Angels? Nope, but you can.
Yeah, and I'm imagining like the committee meetings that these cornerstone execs are having to be like, I mean, people are already coming to us for, smokes and candy and slushies, whatever. Like, let's just rent them some movies because we can. And everyone's renting movies. Everyone needs to rent a movie. And if you're a Blockbuster, and you're thinking about opening a new franchise, it's like, just go where the people are.
Anywhere.
And church was the same. Just open up a building, call it a church, and people will come.
Because they have to. If they want what you are giving, they have to come.
And so what happens when the demand, when the audience shrinks? That's the first big major hurdle that we need to contend with. And it's happening in every industry. This isn't just for churches. I was on Twitter this past weekend, and the NBA, when we're recording this, has proposed some new rules and some new ideas because they're also living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years. And even though the NBA is massively popular, they're seeing the game-to-game viewership drop. The 82-game season, people don't seem to care about anymore. And star players are resting and not playing. And the value of a regular season game has dropped considerably because once you get to the playoffs, it's like the whole game, the whole sport changes.
Right.
And so this has conditioned the audience of the NBA to watch less and to value, unless you're a crazy hard fan like me, to value those individual regular season games less. So they're talking like, what if we did a play-in tournament similar to the MLB wildcard games?
Right.
What if we did like a December-January tournament where it's like the soccer and the Premier Leagues where there's multiple different championships you can win in a single season? And I saw one tweet that I thought was incredibly insightful. They said, the NBA thinks it has a problem. This isn't an NBA problem. This is an industry problem.
Yes.
And your church can do the same thing. You can look at what's happening. Our membership is not on the incline.
Our church is dying.
Attendance might be on the decline.
It's like, maybe not.
It might not have anything to do with your church. If the demand, if the audience is shrinking, that might not mean that your church is shrinking. It just means all of church attendance is shrinking and you could be affected by it. And this is what makes things so difficult because if you're the NBA, you have to ask yourself, is this a wave that we can fight? Or is this a wave we need to ride? Like, do we need to swim against this, swim upstream?
Right.
Or do we need to ride this wave that's changing? And Blockbuster had to contend with the same philosophy. Netflix comes to them and says, would you like to buy us? And Blockbuster's like, no, we're not going to ride that wave. We can fight against you until the wave was too big and took them under. And so we're all playing this guessing game. And so what's the solution? Well, for us, we think that one of the best things that you can do to ensure your longevity as an organization is to untether your financial books from donations as the 100% funding source that you have. Because if we know that people are just attending church less, thanks atheists and millennials, wait till Gen Z gets here. Woo-wee! If people are just attending church less, you can do everything that you possibly can to promote a culture of giving and donations, but that might not be enough because if you used to have 200 people and now you have 100, it's not going to be realistic to expect them to give twice as much as they used to. So we need to consider other funding models. And so we have an entire episode on this, a church buildings episode where we talk about your facility and repurposing it for multi-use beyond just a Sunday service. So we're going to link that in the show notes for this episode. So we want to encourage you to check that out. One final piece of data. This comes from Ezra Klein on Twitter. And it simply says, almost 70% of American seniors are white and Christian. Only 29% of American young adults are white and Christian.
Wow.
To have that type of change with two generations that are currently alive, one of which represents the primary leadership in our churches and one which represents the primary demographics
the largest
of
living
the country and
generation.
continent, is amazing to think that the demo could have changed that quickly.
Incredible.
I don't know if there's a better example of how big of a shift we're living through, and that presents massive challenges.
Sure does.
Let's talk about reason number 2, the second major hurdle that you're going to have to overcome, and that is a lack of identity. This stems almost entirely from the cultural Christianity that used to exist. You didn't have to necessarily be a strategic thinker to run, host, lead a church that did exceptionally well.
Just had to be there. Just had to show up.
You just had to build it and they will come. When the paradigm shifts and that truth is no longer true, a lot of our churches are like, well, what is wrong? We used to do this and it worked. And now what we're doing doesn't work. And that presents a fight or flight response. We start thinking, well, we've always done it this way. We got to keep doing it this way. It's what led to success in the past. We can't give up now.
Yeah. I'm thinking, just as you're saying this, I'm thinking about like what it would have been like to go to church in the Niagara region 30 years ago, before the internet, before Instagram, before I knew what your church was doing, right? So I go to my church, Life Abundant Niagara, a small little church in the country. I think everything's good because I don't know what you're up to at Central. But now, because I can see everything that you're doing online, thanks to the internet, I see a stronger sense of identity at your church. And I'm drawn to that because I can see it. I can see the possibility of being a part of something that's meaningful because of your sense of identity. I wouldn't have known that if it weren't for the internet. But now because I can see online everything that every church is doing, of course I'm going to flock to a church that has a strong sense of identity, a church that has a strong sense of mission, a church that is very clear on the ministries that they support. Oh, I've heard of that ministry. I'd love to partner with this church. So I pick up and I move there. I go there because I can. And that was never really a thing before.
And when you have the culture that just allows you to open your doors and for things to work, because 7 out of 10 people in the country just go to church because that's what you do. You never have the need to have any organizational structure, to establish an identity of your church, to understand how to make decisions, forecasting, evaluation, measurement, because it's almost like whatever you do, it just works.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work as much as the church down the road, it doesn't matter. It works enough for you to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But then when the audience shrinks and churches are now closing their doors because it shrinks for everyone. Sure, the mega church, and as someone who's at a big church, like we're dealing with those issues as well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, people are attending church less, that affects us, but we can still keep afloat, assuming that we're not a bloated organization with way too much overhead. But if you're a smaller church, a 20% drop in membership could mean way, way more. And suddenly you can't even afford to pay the one pastor that's on staff.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an understanding of your identity, of who you are, and of who you're trying to reach because of that, you're going to be in a tough place. And so the solution here is to ask yourself, what are our strengths and weaknesses, and who are we uniquely equipped to serve? So let's talk about some examples of this. You could, as a church, have a priority on kids and or students. You could, as a church, have a priority on spectacle and experience. There are some churches that are just amazing at creating incredibly immersive 1-hour experience. And our church would fall more in this type of category. But we're not exceptionally well, inversely, on a rich, intimate community experience because we're just bigger.
Sure.
And so we lean into our identity, and you should lean into your identity as well. You can maybe have a priority on local benevolence and justice. Or maybe you're the type of church with a priority on rich theological teaching. But once you understand your identity and you can lean into that, that's going to allow you to make decisions, allow you to have more of a strategy, allow you to forecast beyond just the next Sunday coming up. And to use a very specific example, I was doing some research this weekend for another episode on Mike Todd, who's the lead pastor of Transformation Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I was listening to an interview he was doing, and he talked about how he preaches. That was the question from the interviewer. And he's like, it all comes down to our primary target, who we're trying to reach. He has an actual name for the person. The guy's name is Stormy. And then he goes off to list 5 or 6 things about Stormy, who's a hypothetical individual that he preaches to every single time he gets on stage. He's like, 28-year-old dad, not married. He really cares about image. He wants to be a part of a crew and to know like, oh, these are my guys. This is my family. And he also wants to be a part of like whatever the big moment is.
Right.
And because that's the church, or that's the individual Transformation Church is trying to reach, and that's laser targeted.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise that they've seen massive growth over the last couple of years because they've said, this is who we're trying to reach. So how we design our slides, how we dress, how we create an atmosphere, how our worship is shared corporately, and what we do on social media, all of it is going to be purposeful for this individual. And guess what? Some people don't like that.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
Yeah.
Back in the day, Mike Todd would take secular songs like, whatever Drake's #1 on the charts is, and he would rip the instrumental and use it as the backing track of him preaching and share that on Instagram.
Right.
He'd only get like 476 views. But he knew back then, this is the person I'm trying to reach. And if they're scrolling through and hear the passion fruit instrumental, they're going to immediately be, why is there a preacher? And this is different.
Yeah.
This speaks to me. Wow, he's wearing some Jordans while preaching. This speaks to me. And suddenly they're reaching their target audience. Let's use an analogy in the non-church world. Not too long ago, Elon and Tesla announced the Cybertruck. I don't know about you. What I saw online was mostly, almost entirely, people being like, that is the ugliest design I've ever seen.
Of metal,
Whoever thought this was a good idea should be fired. This is a sign that Tesla has no idea what they're doing.
Right.
But what happened?
Just complete internet domination.
The amount of pre-orders that came in
Unbelievable.
for this futuristic, otherworldly truck was beyond anything that we've seen in the automotive industry. Why? Because Tesla knows who they're trying to reach. And they don't really care if a 55-year-old rural American thinks their truck is ugly.
Right.
Because that's not who they're trying to reach.
Sure.
And once you have that identity, once you know who you are, once you know in your mind, Stormy, this 20-year-old dad, he wants to be a part of a crew. He wants to be part of the next big cultural moment. He's a dad. He's unmarried. Now you can reach that individual.
Yeah.
And what happens is once you actually target an individual, you actually reach the people that are near them.
Yeah.
But you can't reach everyone that's near them if you're trying to reach everyone at once. You got to target.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can hear some hypothetical opposition to this, like Brady. The gospel is for everyone.
Wow.
Jesus came from all men, women, children alike.
You were not
this
the
and that.
gospel. You go ahead.
And that's true. But if you look at the life of Jesus in the way that we have recorded in the Gospels, he targeted a very specific type of people with his short 3-year ministry on earth. He was always on the lookout for the outcasts, the people who needed to be elevated, the people who felt estranged from systems and structures. He was always on the lookout for them. And those were the types of people that were like his ride or die, that were like just with him wherever he went. And did that keep him from talking to, religious elect or Pharisees or tax collectors? No, he spoke with them as well. I can't imagine there was a whole lot of them in his crowd, but tangentially they were involved in his ministry. But he came with a message for a very specific audience that was designed to spread throughout the entire earth. We know that. And that's what you're going to see at your church, because we've talked about this before. We can't, as pastors, as churches, as preachers, we can't be, as people, we can't be everything to everyone. We just can't. We're not going to do anything great if we try to do everything great. And so having that hyper focus on who you want to reach and how you want to reach them is going to be super helpful for you as you learn to craft your identity as a community. I saw a great example just this morning of a local church in our community who's doing this really well, like inter-organizationally. So they have 3 campuses, but if you go on their website, they have I think it was called core values for each campus. So their downtown campus, their core value is homelessness. And their Welland campus is migrant workers, because we have a lot of folks come up from the Caribbean to work on the farms in the summer. And then their Vineland campus was for low-income families. So same church, but each 3 campuses hyper-focused on the community that they're planted in and saying, hey, if you are interested in what this church is called Southridge, what Southridge believes in and how we work, well, in this part of the city, we're involved in this kind of work. And in this part of the city, we're involved in this kind of work. So me, as somebody who's maybe looking for a new church, I can see, hey, I don't really have a heart for low-income families, but man, I would love to serve in a homeless shelter. So because their identity and their mission is so clearly defined, I know where I fit in as somebody who wants to belong to their church.
And their physical location informs that identity, just as your senior leadership will inform that identity, your strengths and weakness. And this is why self-awareness is so important.
Yeah.
And this is why we're in a tough spot, because back when everyone just attended church, you didn't need that level of self-awareness because you could just set up shop and you would be able to stay afloat thanks to cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
So that's problem number 1, shrinking audience and an increase in secularization. Problem number 2, that leads to a lack of identity. Problem number 3, and it all just compounds on top of each other, aging leaders. Now, 2 years ago, we published a video called Why Pastors Are Too Old, and everyone agreed. No, it ruffled some feathers.
Yes, I hadn't worked here I had been here for about a year, but
You didn't,
I hadn't been on the show for too long. And that was the first time that I was involved in like some outrage on the internet that manifested in a pretty filthy like YouTube comment section. And I was shook. I'm like, we're just trying to do the Lord's work here. And it was all based off data. We're just trying to present the data. And people seem very upset.
That's what I tell my
wife.
I know I'm insulting you, but the data is there.
Yeah.
Sometimes that
She loves
apparently
that.
doesn't seem to make a difference.
She loves that.
You didn't have the equity to be like, can we not run this episode?
Right.
I was like, look, newbie, look, Rook,
I'm just
we're
here
going to
for-
insult pastors, and you're going to open it up for me.
I'm just here for the ride.
The point of this episode, if you didn't watch it, if you didn't hear it, was simple. So allow me to explain. In 1992, the average age of a Protestant lead pastor was 44 years old.
Okay.
So a year before Alex was born, a year after I was born. Average Protestant lead pastor, 44.
Okay.
Fast forward to 2016, average age, 54. A full decade older.
So in the span of 20 years, the average age of Protestant lead pastors accelerated by 10 years.
Yeah. And that is meaningful. It matters because what it represents is a lack of replacement in senior leaders. The leaders are getting older. That's what normally happens. But the average age shouldn't necessarily get older because leaders are being replaced. And what made it even more weird is the fact that millennials young folk are the largest living generation in North America.
So like the talent pool should be bigger.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now, of course, we know millennials are attending church less,
Right.
which contributes to that.
Yeah.
But you might be thinking, well, you know what? You should have an older lead pastor anyway. 44, 54, what matters is that they're, more mature. And I understand where you're coming from
Absolutely.
with that statement. Not going to argue with it if that's your thing. Consider this. In 1968, 55% of pastors, more than half, were under the age of 45. In 2017, just 22% under the age of 45. That is a massive drop. That is more than a double drop. And that matters because what it represents is boomers were in lead pastor positions when they were young.
Yeah.
Millennials are not in lead pastor positions when they are young. There is a massive disparity there.
Yeah.
You can make what you will of that disparity. Either boomers should have never been in that place to begin with,
Right.
or we should have more millennials in that place now.
You can't have
one of those
yes.
has to be true.
Yes.
And especially considering we're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years, there is something that young people bring to the table because we grew up through this communication shift that cannot be replaced. And if you are someone who's 50 plus trying to lead a church, it's going to be that much more difficult for you to incorporate all of these changes in the digital world. Does that mean you need to give up your spot?
No, please don't.
Not at all, because we know that church needs to be multi-generational, and there always needs to be two parties at work here. What we do think you need to do is get young people a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Not a seat where they can just sit
You don't
and
need to
observe.
sit in the throne.
Absolutely. They don't need to be at the head of the table,
Yeah.
but we also don't want to just give them a place at the table for the sake of it.
Right.
It needs
your
to matter.
Your token millennial.
Exactly.
Yes.
We don't want to do that
Yeah,
either.
they have to have a voice.
And again, because we were talking about this at lunch, this is not a church-specific thing. This is happening across all industries.
Yeah.
And to use one specific example would be in the sports world.
Sure.
So there are a number of, teams that Alex and I are fans of. You can see them if you're watching the YouTube version.
You can see one of those teams represented in this room, not the other one.
Well, we've got the Niners and the Raptors.
Yeah. Any Maple Leaf paraphernalia back
The
here?
who? See,
Yeah, exactly.
the Toronto Raptors.
World champions.
Really?
World champions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
2018 in the summer, they fire their coach who just won the Coach of the Year.
Yes, that happened.
And they replaced him,
With who?
his subordinate, his assistant coach, Nick Nurse. Dwayne Casey fired, replaced with Nick Nurse. That tweet announcement resurfaced on Twitter over the last week.
Because it's been about a year.
And I was reading through the original replies to this tweet. People are slandering the Raptors.
Who is this guy?
Reporters, Twitter fans. Why would you fire the Coach of the Year? What a disgrace of an organization. And then what happened? Football. This is happening too. Yesterday, so now fast forward a couple of weeks, but yesterday, the Niners, my team, faced off against the Ravens. Before the game begins, Niners are 10-1, Ravens are 9-2.
Yeah.
Maybe the best two teams in football right now. Both led by young, innovative head coaches. John Harbaugh, the coach of the Baltimore Ravens, who hired a young, in his 20s mathematician
To speak into his ear during live gameplay and give
run
him mathematical
the
percentages.
odds on should we go for this on 4th and 3, 4th and 4. What are the chances? What predictive points or predictive win percentage does going for it lead to? And why would you do that? You kick the ball on 4th down. Unless it's 4th and 1 from the opponent's 40. There's a small sliver of 4th downs where you go for it.
That's how we've always done it. That's how
we've
you play
always
the
done
game.
it. And if you are Kyle Shanahan, the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, why are you running such misdirect plays and all of these unconventional setups? This is all gimmickry. Just play power football, run the ball. And it's not that these two are mutually exclusive, but when these young coaches and these young executives are empowered with all of the new data and all of this new world that we have, good things can happen.
Yeah.
It always requires two parties, though, because the owners of these teams, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment for the Raptors, the owners of the Yorks who own the Niners, and pardon me, I don't know who owns the Ravens because I'm not a Ravens fan, they had to entrust a young person or a coach who then hired a very young person and put their reputation and their multi-$100 million company in the hands of that individual and say, I know that football has always been done this way. And I know that basketball has always been done this way. I want you to shoot mostly only three-pointers and layups now.
Yeah.
I know no one has ever done it this way, but let's do it.
Why? Because the young kid is telling me that the math says so, because he's using these tools, these analytic tools that didn't exist before the advent of the internet, right?
And it's a massive risk.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll work out, sometimes it won't. But what happens to the organizations that never embrace the change? You end up languishing in obscurity and embarrassment because you're unable to make good decisions and you're unable to use all of the data that's available to you.
Yeah.
Before the Raptors ever won the championship, they built a state-of-the-art practice center that included a first-of-its-kind analytics department that had never existed before. And they started working on their player development program. They bought in to get a minor league, G League team out of Mississauga. And that's where all of their players who they had drafted went in. And that player development also included scouting, taking Pascal Siakam, who a very raw, green 27-year-old from Cameroon, and bringing him up. And he played in the G League for a long time. Then he was the most improved player last year. And now he's looking like an MVP. And they got undrafted Fred VanVleet, who nobody wanted. And now he's going to get a huge payday this upcoming year because without Kyle Lowry in the lineup, he's averaging 22, 4, and 7, shooting 40% from three. Okay, you've had enough with the Raptors. I get it. The point is this. This is not church specific. The biggest communication shift is affecting automotives with Tesla, the way we engage with media with Blockbuster and Netflix and Disney Plus, and it's affecting sports and it's affecting church. Hey, it wasn't too long ago where Netflix was valued at a higher number than Disney. And Disney was having its moment. Is it going to be able to take its legacy and navigate this communication shift? And I haven't seen the numbers in the last month, but I would be shocked if Disney has not overtaken in its valuation. It's got to be a certainty over Netflix because it took a while, but Disney Plus has been amazing for them in just its first month. Some organizations will navigate the communication shift. Good job, Disney. Others won't. Sorry, Blockbuster. Which one is your church going to be? If you don't have the older generation empowering the younger and the younger being willing to step up and put in the work, you really can't do it without both of those parties.
Yeah, and that move to empower a young person, whether it's in sports, whether it's in church, often comes amidst a lot of opposition, a lot of speculation.
It looks great afterwards.
Yes, a lot of apprehension because it's like, hey, what are you doing? Like, what does this kid know? Or like in the case of a young pastor, what does this guy know? He's not even married, you know? He hasn't had kids yet. Like he hasn't lived long enough. And I don't know. It's just we see it happening in all sorts of industries, and I know maybe it's hard to hear from us because we are millennials, but we just think like this is a risk worth taking for the sake of the vitality of our churches, right? Like this is a chance worth taking, and maybe you shoot your shot and it doesn't go well for you. Well, it's okay. Have a culture where it's okay to make mistakes and go out on a limb and try something new. You know, you and I are digital natives. We grew up with the internet, so we bring a skill set to the table that's very unique to us that most people older than us just don't have. And I live life with a lot of people who are just marginally older than me, and they are really struggling to kind of meet me where I'm at with like just my knowledge of the internet with digital things, because there's just such a huge gap there and it's hard to go back retroactively. So I really do think that young folks, millennials, bring a really unique skill set to the table that, and I work in a church, I pastor in a church, so I know how valuable those skills are. But I also know this because I pastor in a church, and this is something I never considered when we recorded that episode 2 years ago. But within the context of this episode, within the context of church audience shrinking and church not looking maybe as vibrant as it used to, I wonder if older church leaders are hanging on, because when you lead a faith community, you take a lot of pride in the community that you've built and that you take care of. And I wonder if church leaders are hanging on because they see less millennials coming to church. They see church as they would probably define it, dying, and they just can't trust hanging over the reins of that because they're not often handing over the reins of something that's flourishing.
Right.
It's something that is trending in a way that they don't really like to see it go. So they're just not ready to hand it over yet because they don't have enough trust equity built up in the millennials. They see the rest of millennials not even coming to church. So they say, well, how can I hand this over to somebody younger than me when their peers aren't even coming to church? I can't trust them with this thing that I've built. I think that's probably an important element to consider, especially when it comes to aging leaders in the context of the current state of church today.
Imagine that you have a bank account and there's $1,000 in it. And month over month, you're losing $50, $100, and you're down to $432. You're not going to be in a position, probably because of the fight or flight just response within us, to be more willing to be generous in giving that away. No, you're going to hoard it. Even though it's going down, and you hoarding it will guarantee it continues to go down and almost certainly doesn't allow it to go back up. At least you can like hold on to it and you can feel some type of security and safety. And the paradoxical response that we need to embrace is, even as things are going down, that's the sign. You can't keep doing things the way they were done. You can't dig your feet into the ground. You can't put your head into the sand. Whatever appendage into whatever type of foundation, you've got to embrace change and take the risk and make the leap. What will happen? World champions! That's what'll happen!
Maple Leafs next. Stanley Cup champions, come on.
You know what? I'm here for it.
Let's go!
I'm ready to be a bandwagon fan. It's been since the 7th grade.
Hey, the Leafs are empowering a younger coach, a very young GM. We're making strides.
And they had to fire their coach, who was one of the
old guard.
But he was also one of the most established, well-renowned. I remember when he was hired, Mike Babcock, we were all like, this is it. This is the final missing
greatest
piece to
coaches
the puzzle.
of all time.
But he was unwilling to change. We've seen this with so many football coaches. Ones that were once great and haven't been able to adjust their game. We see this in basketball. We see this in every sport. It's these great coaches. And then the game changes. The rules of engagement change, and they're not able to adopt. They're not able to adapt. They're not able to move forward. The 3 major hurdles your church needs to consider. This counts for every church. My church, Alex's church, a church that's a month away from closing its doors, a church that is thriving because this change, this communication shift is still just at its precipice. Number 1, shrinking audience. Number 2, a lack of identity. And number 3, aging leaders. Of course, with this new paradigm shift, we have a new need for new tools. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not building a church. We're building software for church leaders. And that software is called Nucleus. Recently, we lowered the price of Nucleus. And that was because we brought multiple platforms together, consolidated, and the price of Nucleus stayed the same.
We added products to the platform.
This is not we didn't technically decrease the price.
We added products that were worth more than what Nucleus was worth and said you can have it all for the same price that Nucleus was worth.
Nucleus and StoryTape before cost $300 together. Together. Now, $100.
Do that math and you might be concerned for the future of this business, but
we're taking a risk. We're trying to adapt to the changing times.
You know what I say to the people, the churches I chat with every day when we're talking about this merger? I say, look, we at Pro Church Tools are all about getting more tools in the hands of more churches because we really believe that these specific tools that we're developing are helping churches navigate this very thing we're talking about. Like this.
And if we care about that, we need to make it more accessible to more churches.
Yeah, exactly.
And that comes with a risk, but it was a risk that we were willing to take. And the reason why is for reasons like this. Ben told us, hey, Brady and team, thank you from a pastor of a church running 300 that can't afford a media team. This Sunday, I'm preaching on Luke 12. He shares a bit of his message, and then he follows up and says, what you did with this announcement, the lower price, is value eternal life. This is not capitalism. It's a gospel-centered business practice. Thank you for running a business that plays an infinite game that's not bound by quantity or quality of life, but eternal life.
Wow.
This announcement and pricing is going to awaken the gospel imagination of people not connected to our church because you have made your product available and affordable to everyone.
Can you wind that back? Pro Church Tools, awakening the gospel imagination of people.
New slogan.
Yes.
Luke said this.
That's going to be my first tattoo.
Wow, that is a huge step.
Yes.
Another church, Gateway, Luke said, hey guys, just want to say a massive thank you for integrating StoryTape and the social media program to Nucleus. For the last few months, I've been really struggling for things to post on social. I wanted to purchase the social program, but I couldn't afford it. What you've done has been an absolute lifesaver for our church. Thank you. Our engagement has gone through the roof. And I was just wondering if you're going to be posting more anytime soon. Well, yeah, always posting more. It's just the beginning.
That church had a new family show up because of what they were posting on
social. Oh, that was that church?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes.
One more church. This is Dalton. He says, thank you. Really, I've been listening to the podcast, implementing every strategy I could for about 3 years now. Our church has grown, but our finances haven't. Why? Because of just everything we just said, probably. Convincing my pastor to pay $125 for a website was almost impossible. Convincing him to pay $200 for media, out of the question. I did the 30-day trial, convinced him to give Nucleus a shot, and it's been a great year. Through your help, our website reaches thousands. Our social engagement has shot through the roof. I'm going to start crying. The amount of free quality content you already provide is outstanding. And now this value of Nucleus helps us, and I'm sure hundreds of other churches in our situation even more. Thank you. You just proved to the whole world that you're a ministry first and a business second.
Who's cutting onions in here?
And what he said is so important to me.
Jonas, he's cutting onions.
Because he's like, I want Story Tape, and I want the social program, and I want Nucleus, but I'm not the one that gets to make this decision.
Yeah.
And I've been listening for 3 years, hearing everything. How many people have been listening to this show for the 7 or 8 years we've been doing the podcast? And now at its new price point of $99 a month for Nucleus Social, Nucleus Media, Nucleus Web, Nucleus Sermons for $99 a month. Nucleus has now become accessible to so many more churches, and that's what it's all about.
Yes, that's it.
Right now, we've lost $250,000 this year. And we're not going to shut our doors because we're a multi-million-dollar company.
Yeah.
But I'm the one that gets to make that decision.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm willing to take that hit. Oh, by the way, it's my business. It's my money.
Right.
I said, no, I don't want that money.
Yeah.
And because we're good. We gave that back to churches and making the product more accessible now to hopefully hundreds and thousands of churches that it was inaccessible to before. And we have a 30-day free trial. If you need time to convince your leleadership, we put together a PDF. It's like 185 pages called Convince Your Boss.
You need more time? I'll give you more time. We'll extend that trial.
You need scholarships? Oh, if only we had them available. We do.
Yes.
Nucleus.church. Download 30 free social posts. Download 30 free 4K.
Post them.
Just post them. Just get that engagement.
Yeah.
Follow the guides. Pair the training you're learning and hearing with the product. Nucleus.church. We'll be back in just a moment. Alex is bringing us this week's top 5. All right, Alex, take us away. This week's top 5 that I will certainly not have any quibbles with.
Well, that's right. It's time for your pastor's favorite segment, Top 5, the segment in which we tackle the top 5 things that rarely have anything to do with anything important.
You've just heard me yell. You need a reprieve. You need a little break, a little selah.
Look, Thanksgiving is in the past for both Canadians and Americans.
Finally.
And so, of course, it's Christmas time. And this week, I wanted to tackle the top 5 Christmas songs of all time. Now, first, and
well, we know what number 1 is.
It's very important, honorable mentions to all carols. So there's no carols on the list because I think carols would have dominated the top 5. So this is like top 5 classic Christmas songs.
What's a carol?
I don't know, anything you'd sing in church, basically. So like, Oh Holy Night, best Christmas song of all time, not on the list.
Oh!
Yes.
So this is just like...
Classic. This is what you're hearing on 102.5.
So this is just 5 different Justin Bieber songs.
What you're hearing at the mall. So honorable mention to all carols.
Oh Holy Night, greatest Christmas song of all time.
Honorable, we can be agreed on that.
Love
honorable
the Glee
mention
version. The
to
Glee version.
No.
This is your top 5.
No.
Yes, the Glee version.
Get Glee out of here. We'll talk about that later. Honorable mention to Lauren Daigle's Christmas album, one of my favorites of all time. Honorable mention to John Legend's Christmas album, last year released, this year nominated for a Grammy.
Grammy nominated.
So good. And, of course, Hillsong's Peace Project. Original Christmas songs on there and carols, so good. And one more honorable mention, a song called Snow by Sleeping at Last. It's got to be my favorite like wintertime song ever.
Do you mean Snow by the Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Not quite. A little bit different. So in the 5 spot, we have a song all the way from 1963, written by Andy Williams, called The Most Wonderful Time of the Year. Now this song's in my top 5 because every time Christmas comes around, when I'm writing like social posts or emails, when I'm writing an email to our church, I always want to start it with, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, basic.
It's just that phrase is ingrained into my psyche, and I guess it wouldn't have existed if it weren't for that song.
Well, see, that's interesting because...
If you try and Jesus juke me and tell me that Easter's the most wonderful time of the year.
You know what I was going to say? I was like, you would say that because it'll change once you have kids. Sorry, that's an inside joke. Do you remember when Staples started doing that promotion where like it was August and they're like, it's the most wonderful time. It's like, your kids are going back to school. Come get their school supplies.
That's good.
I'm so sorry. I'm ruining your top 5.
That's good advertisement because it would it's like a pattern interrupt. Like, why are you hearing that song in August?
Yes.
Yes.
Ooh, stop the scroll. Stop the fast forward.
Staples.
Stop the PVR.
Yes. The
Number
most
4?
wonderful time of the year. Number 4, this is a classic. It's performed and made popular by Bing Crosby, actually written all the way back in the 30s. This is Walkin' in a Winter Wonderland. I always wonder what folks who don't live in the Great White North
True.
think about Christmas songs that talk about snow all the time.
Well, their kids are really sad, I think.
Like, do you sing them?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like this mythology that
Like a
you
fantasy.
build it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously Christmas and snow tied together. And you sing these songs just as you would if you lived in Canada or the Northeast, but you have this like huge imagination around it because you rarely if ever see it.
And I guess Christmas and snow are married because of Santa's residence in the North Pole.
The North Pole.
What would Christmas be if it's not white? Like, it just wouldn't feel right.
Like if you're in LA, smoggy.
Yeah.
Walking in a smoggy wonderland. No.
So shout out to Bing Crosby because he's got the song in the 3 spot as well.
Yeah, he does.
Yes. This is the world's best-selling single ever.
Whoa.
I was shook when I read that.
Huh.
The best-selling single ever, over 50 million copies sold.
Let It Snow?
No, White Christmas.
Oh, badoo. That's what I was gonna say, but then I got all.
Yes, that's a classic. Have yourself.
It's on my Christmas playlist.
Yes.
And I have almost no songs on my
dr-
Christmas playlist.
I wonder if he got a White Christmas because he was just dreaming of it. Oh my gosh, that song is written by someone who probably never had a White Christmas.
That's a tragedy.
That's what we just described.
Poor Bing.
That song goes out to all of you who live south of the border or I guess not in Boston or New York or Chicago, who've never had a White Christmas.
Wow.
You deserve a White Christmas.
You do.
But if you can't have it, I hope the song finds you well and that you dream of a White Christmas.
Yeah.
In the 2 spot is a song made popular and performed by one of my wife's favorite artists, Frank Sinatra. Not written by Frank. The song is Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, of course. There's
a lot of old songs on here so far, I gotta say.
So this song was written for Judy Garland to perform in the musical Meet Me in St. Louis. Judy Garland, of course, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Do you want to hear the original lyrics?
No. Are they problematic?
It's dark. This is just one stanza from the original song. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. It may be your last. Next year, we may all be living in the past.
Who wrote this? Satan?
I don't know. Somebody wrote it for the musical for Judy Garland to perform. Frank Sinatra got a hold of this track and says, I need to save this. Brought the song into the workshop.
When was this written?
I don't know. Maybe
during the
Judy
war?
Garland's, I don't know, maybe the 40s?
Yeah.
50s?
Like, Hitler's coming.
Yes. This may be your last. Next year, we may all be living in the past. So that's
How
dark.
did you take a top 5 of Christmas songs?
I was just doing some recon on some of these songs to see who actually wrote them because they're so classic, so
Right,
old.
and you realize like whenever you learn anything about people you look up to that they're
Exactly,
all just flawed
and
human
then
beings
so
and
I'm
it's
getting
terrible.
I'm getting tidbits like White Christmas, best-selling single ever. Like that's awesome.
Can I just say one thing?
It's
aside from the fact that all of your 4 are from like the 11s
Yes.
so far, like the 10s.
Yeah.
No Michael Bublé. So far, no Justin Bieber. So far,
Stop.
no Mariah Carey. So far,
In the 1 spot. I started with the 1 spot on this list.
yeah.
When I started this list, okay, this one goes in the 1 spot. Let's fill in the blanks. All I Want for Christmas, Brady.
The Justin Bieber version.
No, it's you. It's Mariah Carey because it's classic. Shout out to Mariah Carey for releasing this year a reimagined version of this album with some live versions.
Oh.
All I Want for Christmas Is You, Mariah Carey, original. No, nobody else wrote this for anybody else. This was not performed in a 40s musical. It doesn't have a dark first version. This is the best Christmas song. Again, honorable mention to All Carols and O Holy Night. Best Christmas song that you're going to hear on the radio this year. Please don't do this to them.
Oh, the Beebs version. Let's go.
How old is he?
Oh, he's like 16.
Yeah, like he sounds like a child.
My favorite song of all time, Christmas song, Mistletoe.
Oh, no. Okay. We can't do this on a public platform.
Also, Christmas by Bublé, Baby Please Come Home.
Yeah, a great one.
I really like Tyler, the Creator's Grinch
from
soundtrack
the Grinch.
last year.
Yes.
Santa Tell Me, Queen Ariana.
Oh, yeah.
Sleigh Ride by Fun. Oh Holy Night by the Glee cast. See, my top 5, sophisticated, current, modern. Yours? Ooh, timeless. Well,
Mine are transcendent.
you're telling me that Mistletoe by 14-year-old Justin Bieber does not transcend?
It doesn't.
I've been listening to that for a decade.
It doesn't transcend much.
Wow.
It didn't transcend puberty for him.
You know, first of all, you need to show some more love to our Canadian Christian brother.
That's true.
Loves the Lord.
Welcome to the
from
family.
Stratford, Ontario, down the street.
Just down the street.
You're slandering
That's
him.
a fact.
I don't appreciate that.
No love for Mistletoe, but I might spin his feature on All I Want for Christmas Is You.
Okay. I think that's a good step forward for you.
Look at me, I'm growing.
Let's close out this episode with our Q&A segment. This question comes in, it reads, Hey Brady, quick question. When running Facebook ads, or any ads at all, which interests groups should I target? Are there any tools I can buy or use to help me target new people so that they can come check out my church? This is a pretty frequent question. The Facebook ads interface is not fun. It's just terrible.
Yeah.
And it is not easy to navigate. As Facebook has grown, so have the Facebook ad tools.
Yes.
And it can be incredibly intimidating to get inside of that Facebook ads interface and try to navigate it.
It's like WordPress. It's like, I know that this thing can do anything I want it to, or like After Effects.
Right.
I know I can literally do anything with this platform. I just don't know how.
So let me just say, I'm going to make this quick. What you want to do is simplify.
Yes.
For most churches, unless you are living in a highly dense demographic, like at a big American city or a big metropolitan area, all you want to do with your targeting, in our experience, is to target based on the radiance and distance from your church.
Yes.
So depending on the density, 5-mile radius, 10-mile radius, perhaps even... No, that's about as much as 5 to 10 mile radius, depending on your population density. If you're in a more rural area, maybe 10 miles. If you're in a town city, 5 miles is fine. And what you can do though is use your ad copy and your ad creative to call out the individuals that you're trying to reach.
Yeah.
So what you can do is target that 5 to 10 mile radius, and then in your ad copy being like, hey, are you new to town? Or hey, are you a family looking for X, Y, and Z? And you don't necessarily need to be that explicit, because if you are, it can hurt your relevance score, because people that are not those people are gonna be like, why am I getting this? But even in your image copy, you can include a family in your actual image creative rather, and that would signify to the people you're trying to reach that this is for them. At the end of the day though, we've done this with our advertising in the past where we've used our email list. And if your email list is big enough, this is a great place to start. You can create a lookalike audience using Facebook, and then we'll target that lookalike audience, which Facebook has generated based on our email list. And then we'll say something like, hey, church leader, in the caption. And this will automatically call people out. And we'll get some comments like, you always get a comment like this, why am I seeing this ad?
It's like,
I'm not even a Christian.
you could have kept scrolling.
Hail Satan. I'm like, okay, remove, ban, delete. And you become more intelligent based on that fact, and you can move on from there. But don't overcomplicate with interest groups. I've found, in my experience, and I'm not the most seasoned Facebook ad expert, but the more that you try to target individual groups of people, the more it becomes complicated. And in my research for this, based on some of the most successful ad campaigns in the past, you just want to be simple. You want to use your ad creative and your copy to call out the type of person that you want to resonate, respond with the ad. And then for a church, a local organization, just use that 5 to 10 mile radius and go from there, especially because the ads that you should be running are not necessarily like, check out our service, we're breaking down the Gospel of Mark, but something that would be a bridge between your church and an individual that is not yet connected to church at all. We've spent this entire episode talking about how the increase in secularization and the lack of church membership with young people. So if you lead straight with the big ask, it might be a bit too much too fast.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are doing a kids carnival, or you're having Santa hosted at Christmas, something like that would be a great bridge event to advertise on Facebook. And now, pretty much anyone within a 5 to 10 mile radius that has a family, or even if they don't have kids themselves, they might have a nephew, they might have a brother or sister who's younger. And this is why, again, the targeting groups in the actual Facebook interface can be restricting, because let's say, for instance, you wanted to run a Facebook ad for Pictures with Santa, and you are hosting that at your church. You run a Facebook ad and you're like, I don't know if this is a targeting feature, but like, moms with kids under X. You would miss out on targeting Alex, who doesn't have any kids of his own yet, biologically, but he has plenty of nephews and nieces that he would love to take for pictures in Santa, perhaps. And so you actually just targeted him out. Yes. Whereas if you use the ad copy and ad creative to call that out, it allows the individual to opt in. Yes. And it's a tough balance because you don't want to serve irrelevant ads to groups that will drop your relevant score and just cost you more. But at the same token, I have not found Facebook's targeting skills to be that good.
Yeah, and what frustrates me a lot is I see churches wasting money on Facebook ads in the way that they're delivering their ads to people that are never going to be able to take that next step anyways. And that happens a lot with your first point, which is the radius to which you serve your ads. Because it's not sexy when you're building an ad and you have a 5 mile radius and it says estimated to be delivered to reach 1,600 people. It's like, no, I want to reach 22 million people. It's like, well, if I expand my radius to 200 kilometers so I can reach Toronto and get 6 million people, it doesn't matter because someone from Toronto is not going to start coming to my church, right? It's somebody down the street who's going to start coming to my church. So I get frustrated when I'm getting served ads from churches who are way outside of my radius because they're spending money to show that ad to me, but I'm never going to be the one to take that next step that they're asking for. So in this case, when it comes to Facebook ads specifically for churches, it's imperative that you keep it very, very simple. Target your local community. And like you said, use your ad copy and your creative to call out that next step and let them take it. Because you don't want to be really serving a whole lot of ads to too many church people because that you'd be like church poaching. Like you don't want to poach anyone from somebody else's church. You want to reach people in your community who aren't currently active in a faith community. So use your copy and your creative to do that, but stay hyper-focused on a very small radius in your local community.
That being said, if you want to poach, you can use your ad copy. Tired with your current church? Frustrated with your pastor's lack of exegetical skills?
Pastor's too old. Our senior pastor's a millennial.
Having trouble meeting that special someone at your church?
Oh, no. Please don't do any of these. Please don't listen to this.
I'm not suggesting they do it. Thanks for watching this episode of the Bro Church Tool Show. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe for more content like this. Or, if you've had enough, unsubscribe. It's highly unlikely we change. And on that hopeful note, we'll talk soon.